December 8, 1941. Clarkfield, the Philippines. The sun beats down on rows of American warplanes, fueled and armed, their polished metal skins glinting. Pilots, young men squinting into a brilliant, empty blue sky, joke and smoke, waiting for orders. A low, distant hum, almost imperceptible at first, begins to grow. It's not the familiar sound of their own engines. This is different. A thrum that deepens into a drone, then a menacing roar that seems to come from everywhere at once. Suddenly, the sky is full. Dozens, then hundreds of silver aircraft, sun flashing off their wings, red circles painted beneath. The impossible has happened. Japanese Zeros and bombers, flying from bases hundreds of miles away, have arrived. The airwaves crackle to life, a chaotic symphony of panic. "Bandits! 3 o'clock high!" A voice cuts through the static. Where did they... Then silence. The howl of diving engines becomes a physical pressure, a scream that rips through the air as the first bombs fall. Explosions walk across the airfield, turning pristine P-40s and B-17s into blossoming pillars of fire and black smoke. Ground crews sprint for cover, their shouts lost in the cacophony of destruction. This isn't just an attack. It's a terrifyingly precise, coordinated annihilation. From the jungles of Malaya to the rich oil fields of the Dutch East Indies, the story is the same. This aerial onslaught is the key, the tip of the spear designed to shatter Allied defenses across the Pacific. It's meant to isolate garrisons, sink fleets at anchor, and break the will to fight before a single soldier has landed. For years, while the world watched Europe, Japan had been forging this weapon. The Kido Butai, its formidable carrier fleet, had practiced this deadly ballet in secrecy. Its pilots, both Navy and Army, were not novices. They were hardened veterans blooded in the long, brutal war in China. Men like Saburo Sakai, who could slip his Zero through an enemy formation like a ghost, were the product of a training regimen so severe it bordered on inhuman. They flew aircraft built for this moment, the agile, long-legged A6M Zero, and the nimble Ki-43 Hayabusa, fighters that could outturn and outlast anything the Allies could put in the air. Against this tidal wave, the defenders were tragically unprepared. Their radar coverage was patchy, their planes often outdated relics from a peacetime army. Pilots, brave as they were, had a fraction of the flying hours of their Japanese counterparts. In a rickety Brewster Buffalo over the Malayan Peninsula, a young RAF pilot desperately tries to turn with an enemy he can even keep in his sights a phantom that dances on his wingtip before vanishing into the sun. The most dangerous vulnerability, however, was a deep-seated, racial arrogance, a fatal underestimation of Japanese skill and technological prowess. The shock was not just that they had attacked, but that they were so devastatingly good. Back at Clarkfield, the smoke is so thick it chokes the sun. The raid is almost over, but the message is brutally clear. The age of American and British dominance in the Pacific has ended in a matter of minutes. High above the inferno, a final formation of Zeros, their deadly work done, gleams against the smoke-filled sky. As one, they gracefully tilt their wings, banking into a high-side pass over the burning remains of an air force, a final, contemptuous salute before heading for home. The sky over Malaya bleeds fire. Early 1942. The rising sun isn't just a symbol on a flag. It's a searing reality burning across the Pacific. For Allied pilots, sunrise is something to be feared. Over the dense jungle canopy, Brewster Buffaloes and Hawker Hurricanes, legends of another war, are being systematically dismantled. They're coaxed into turning dogfights, lured into a dance where their heavier frames can't keep pace. Below, the Strait of Malacca is a mirror of chaos. Oil slicks catching the fiery streaks of tracer rounds as ships burn. The Nakajima Ki-43, the Oscar, slices through Allied bomber formations not with wild abandon, but with the chilling precision of a surgeon. Its pilots, masters of energy fighting, refuse to be drawn into wasteful maneuvers. They climb, they dive, they kill, and they vanish. The onslaught rolls south, a tidal wave of air power crashing over the Dutch East Indies. Here, Dutch pilots in obsolete Curtiss Hawks and Glenn Martin, bombers fight with desperate courage above their own smoldering convoys. But courage isn't enough. The Zero appears where it shouldn't be, hundreds of miles from any known airfield. Its incredible range, a feat of engineering the Allies can't comprehend, allows it to escort bombers on deep strikes and conduct surprise sweeps over targets thought to be safe. It's a ghost, a phantom that materializes, delivers death, and disappears over the horizon, leaving behind nothing but wreckage and disbelief. The tactical doctrine is brutally effective. Japanese pilots work in perfect harmony, often in 4-plane sections called a asterisk shodai asterisk. One pair acts as the bait or the primary attackers, while the other provides high cover, ready to dive on any enemy that gets fixated on their wingman. They favor slashing high-speed passes the hit and run. They dive from above, guns blazing, and use their superior speed to extend away, climb and set up for another devastating pass. They punish hesitation, they punish mistakes, and they exploit every ounce of their aircraft's performance advantage. For an American P-40 pilot scrambled into the air over the Philippines, the world shrinks to a terrifyingly simple equation. Climbing is suicide. The Zero outclimbs him. Turning is a death sentence. The Zero outturns him. The only escape, the only sliver of hope, is to push the stick forward and dive. He discovers that the P-40 with its heavier airframe can just about outdive the lighter Zero. The only way to live is to run, to go down, hoping the engine doesn't scream itself apart as he plummets toward the jungle below, praying the Japanese pilot won't follow him into the low-altitude danger zone. It's a humiliating, gut-wrenching lesson learned in seconds. Meanwhile, thousands of feet above, a Japanese petty officer, fresh from combat, sits in the ready room. He pulls out a pen and paper to write home. He describes the breathtaking beauty of the sun on his canopy, the clean, swift thrill of a perfect deflection shot, the sight of an enemy plane tumbling from the sky. But in the next line, his tone shifts. He writes of the empty seat in the mess hall, the ache of seeing his wingman's plane blossom into a fireball, a friend lost forever. The cost of victory is etched into every letter. The reach of this aerial dominance seems limitless. The Japanese Navy's carrier fleet, the Kido Butai steams into the Indian Ocean, launching a devastating raid that sinks a British aircraft carrier and sends the Royal Navy reeling. Far to the south, the Australian port of Darwin is savaged by waves of bombers, escorted by those same untouchable Zeros. More bombs are dropped on Darwin in that single day than were dropped on Pearl Harbor. The psychological impact is immense. The Allies are not just being beaten. They are being bewildered. Faced with a fighter that seems to defy the laws of physics, myths begin to sprout like jungle weeds. Allied intelligence reports are filled with desperate theories. The Zeros must be flown by elite German pilots. They must have a secret, supercharged engine. Or maybe their bullets are hollow and filled with an explosive compound. Anything to explain the gap. The truth is far more humbling and uncomfortable. It's not magic, it's mastery. It's the result of superior pilot training, a refined combat doctrine, and meticulous strategic planning that has been years in the making. The Zero is an exceptional machine, but its lethality is multiplied tenfold by the man in the cockpit. But even in the darkest hour, the first seeds of a counteroffensive are being sown. Not in grand fleet movements, but in the minds of the pilots who survive. Somewhere over the tangled jungles of Burma and the volcanic peaks of Rabaul, a new mindset is taking hold. Allied pilots, bloodied and bruised, are beginning to reject the old rulebooks. They stop trying to fight the Zero on its terms. They start observing. They take notes instead of just taking beatings. They notice the Zero's tendency to roll faster to the left than the right. They see its light construction makes it vulnerable to concentrated fire. They confirm its poor performance in a high-speed dive. In debriefs from Rangoon to Port Moresby, scattered pieces of a puzzle are slowly being assembled. Awe is beginning to give way to analysis. Humiliation is hardening into resolve. They are learning how to fight back. The skies over the Pacific were a brutal classroom, and the lessons were written in fire. For Allied pilots, survival meant unlearning everything they thought they knew about air combat. It meant admitting their machines and their tactics were second best. The shock of the Zero forced a painful, rapid evolution. In the jungles of Burma and the skies over China, one man was already rewriting the rulebook. Claire Chennault, leading his American volunteer group, the legendary Flying Tigers, drilled a new mantra into his pilots. Flying the rugged but sluggish P-40 Warhawk, they were told in no uncertain terms, never, ever, get into a turning fight with a Zero. Chennault's doctrine was one of brutal pragmatism. He taught his pilots to refuse the Zero's invitation to a dance. Instead, they were to use the P-40's strengths, its superior diving speed and heavy armor. The tactic was simple, and it was revolutionary. You'd climb high above the Zeros, then dive down in a screaming pass, guns blazing. You hit them once, hard, and then you kept going. You used your speed to escape, climb, and set up another attack. No elegant dogfights, no chivalrous duels. Just a cold, calculated boom and zoom that traded finesse for survival. P-40s became battering rams. Not rapiers, attacking in pairs for mutual protection, disrupting the Zero's deadly ballet. It was the first crack in the Zero's armor of invincibility. Meanwhile, over the vast expanse of the ocean, a similar revolution was taking shape, born not from a general's command, but from a pilot's quiet desperation. On a tabletop aboard the carrier USS Lexington, Lieutenant Commander John Thatch sketched a simple weaving pattern. He was trying to solve an impossible problem. How could two of his slower F-4F Wildcats survive an attack by a single, more agile Zero? The solution he devised was deceptively simple. A defensive maneuver that would become legendary. The Thatch Weave. In the chaos of battle, it looked like controlled panic. Two pairs of Wildcats would fly abreast. When a Zero latched onto one's tail, its wingman would turn sharply in towards it. The targeted pilot would then also turn towards his partner. For a moment, their flight paths would cross, presenting the pursuing Zero with a sudden, head-on firing solution from the other Wildcat. The hunter instantly became the hunted. It forced the Zero pilot to either break off the attack or fly directly into a stream of 50 caliber rounds. For the first time, American pilots had a way to use teamwork to negate the Zero's individual superiority. The Thatch Weave wasn't about outflying the Zero. It was about outthinking it. But to truly understand the Zero is to understand the men who flew it, and the terrible price they paid for its dominance. The Zero's astonishing performance came from a deliberate, ruthless sacrifice of protection. It had virtually no armor plate to shield the pilot and no self-sealing fuel tanks. A single well-placed burst could turn the delicate aircraft into a torch. Every Allied pilot who survived a Zero encounter spoke of how they seemed to disintegrate or explode with the slightest damage. This fragility was a design choice, a gamble on pure offensive capability. This philosophy extended to the pilots themselves. The Imperial Japanese Navy's training program was one of the most demanding in the world. It was an arduous multi-year ordeal that washed out all but the most gifted and dedicated aviators. It produced masters of the craft, pilots who were one with their machines. Men like Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, an ace with an almost ethereal feel for his aircraft, or Saburo Sakai, whose lethal calm in the cockpit was legendary. They were the product of a system that prized perfection, a system built for the deliberate pace of peacetime. But this was the fatal structural flaw. The pipeline was long and exacting, creating a small, irreplaceable cadre of elite warriors. There was no room for error, no system for quickly training replacements. In a war of attrition, this was a death sentence. As the months wore on, the unthinkable began to happen. The masters started to fall. A lucky shot here, a mechanical failure there. Each loss was not just the loss of a man, but the loss of years of irreplaceable experience. Doubt began to creep into the veteran squadrons as familiar faces vanished from the ready rooms. The core of Japan's naval air power was being steadily, relentlessly eroded. The balance of power was shifting, not just in tactics, but in the fundamental arithmetic of war. And as new American carriers, bristling with new planes and pilots trained in new doctrines, steamed over the horizon, the stage was set for a new kind of conflict. For the first time, the Zero would not be dictating the terms of engagement. It would be forced to fight a battle on its opponent's terms. Fleets were converging, and the names of two obscure patches of ocean, the Coral Sea and a tiny atoll called Midway, were about to be etched into history. The Coral Sea, this isn't just a battle. It's a chessboard of fire played across 1,000 miles of ocean. Fleets never see each other, only their proxies, the pilots. High above, American and Japanese escort fighters clash, a chaotic ballet of metal and machine gun fire. Zeros, masters of the dogfight, peel off to slice into the vulnerable American Dauntless dive bombers and Devastator torpedo planes. They are lethal, turning with an impossible grace. But the American Wildcats? They learn. They hold formation, refusing to play the Zero's turning game. They live and die by teamwork, a curtain of firepower that punishes any Japanese pilot who gets greedy. It's a brutal, bloody draw, but it proves something vital. The Zero is not invincible, then comes midway. The screw tightens. On American carriers, the tension is electric. Radar operators call out contacts. Bogies, bearing 320, 150 miles, and the invisible chess game accelerates. Combat air patrols are vectored out to intercept, a calculated, almost cold-blooded deployment of force. Up in the sky, Lieutenant Commander Jimmy Thatch's new tactic, the Thatch Weave, is no longer a theory, it's muscle memory. Two pairs of wildcats flying in formation, weaving back and forth, baiting Zeros and then turning the tables, allowing the wingman to get a clean shot. It's a meat grinder, but it works. Let's be clear, Japanese pilots are still masters of their craft. They meet the American torpedo squadrons with grim, terrifying efficiency. Squadron after squadron is annihilated, torn from the sky before they can even get close. But this is the crucial difference. Every American plane and pilot lost is replaceable. Every experienced Japanese pilot who falls into the sea is a catastrophic, irreplaceable loss. The attrition is beginning to bite. The Japanese Navy, so used to swift, decisive victories, is now bleeding its most valuable resource, its veteran aviators. Longer missions are straining the Zero's limited fuel tanks and the pilot's own endurance. The cracks are starting to show. The fight shifts south to a malaria-infested island called Guadalcanal. The air war here is a daily grinding horror. The slot, the channel between the islands, becomes a nightly gauntlet. Japanese bombers and Zeros fly grueling round trips from Rabaul, hundreds of miles away. Their pilots are exhausted, underfed, and flying planes patched together with dwindling spares. On the island itself, the Cactus Air Force, a motley collection of Marine, Navy, and Army pilots flying from a dirt strip called Henderson Field scrapes together every flyable plane they have. Sorties are launched on a shoestring, pilots flying until they're ready to drop. Here, victory isn't just about skill. It's about sheer, bloody-minded endurance. Who can absorb more punishment? Who can put planes in the air one more day? Amidst this relentless grind, we see a single stark image of this new reality. The legendary Japanese ace, Saburo Sakai, one of the greatest of them all, is grievously wounded over Guadalcanal. Shot through the head, blinded in one eye, paralyzed on one side of his body, he somehow flies his damaged Zero for 4 agonizing hours back to his base. He is a living symbol of unparalleled skill and warrior spirit colliding head-on with the unforgiving limits of flesh, fortune, and the brutal mathematics of a war of attrition. He survives, but the myth of Japanese invincibility is bleeding out with him. The tide isn't turning because of one secret weapon or a single brilliant move. It's turning through the slow, relentless accumulation of advantages. Radar nets are expanding, giving precious minutes of warning. Radios are improving, allowing for better command and control in the chaos of battle. And far away, on assembly lines in places like Buffalo and Long Island, a new generation of American fighters is being born. The balance of power is shifting, not with a sudden crash, but with a deep, gathering rumble. A change is coming. Slowly, just edging into the frame, we see their silhouettes against the Pacific sky. First, the gull-winged Corsair. And then, the Hellcat. The sun over the Pacific in early 1942 was a terrifying sight for Allied pilots. The Mitsubishi Zero seemed invincible, a silver ghost dancing through the sky. But wars aren't won in a single brilliant moment. They are won through learning, adaptation, and sheer, grinding industrial might. By 1943, the tide was turning, and the sky itself was being redrawn. Imagine the scene. A wave of Grumman F-6F Hellcats, diving with brutal, controlled speed. They aren't trying to outturn a Zero. They're using their superior horsepower and rugged construction to slash through formations with devastating effect. Below them, the gull-winged F-4U Corsairs muscle their way through vertical climbs, their massive engines roaring, refusing to be drawn into a low-speed turning fight they can't win. And high above, the twin-boomed P-38 Lightnings stalk their prey from altitude, pouncing with overwhelming firepower before their targets even know they're there. This wasn't just about new machines. It was about new pilots. Thousands of them, trained hard and guided by a new, disciplined doctrine. Ground-controlled radar vectored them into perfect ambush positions, stripping away the Zero's legendary situational awareness. American and British naval aviators learned to use teamwork, energy fighting, and the Thatch Weave to counter the Zero's agility. They fought as a unit, a coordinated fist of steel, not as lone duelists. In stark contrast, Japan's elite cadre of veteran pilots was being bled white. The brutal attrition over the Solomon Islands emptied rosters that could never be refilled. Seasoned aces who had once terrorized the skies over China and Pearl Harbor were now gone. In their place came green replacements, rushed through shortened training programs. Their instructors were often just memories. Legends of pilots were no longer there to mentor them. Japan's factories, struggling under immense strain, simply couldn't produce new planes or experienced pilots fast enough to replace the catastrophic losses. The design trade-offs that had made the Zero so brilliant in 1941 now became fatal liabilities. Its lightweight construction, which gave it such incredible range and agility, offered almost no protection for the pilot or fuel tanks. Against the heavier, faster, and more robust American fighters armed with 6.50 caliber machine guns, a single well-aimed burst could turn a Zero into a flaming torch. Japanese doctrine, once so effective, adapted too slowly to the new reality. The dominoes began to fall. The brutal campaigns in the Bismarck Archipelago and the Marshall Islands saw allied numbers simply smother the remaining Japanese defenders. The skill was often still there, but it was overwhelmed by mass. Then came the Marianas. June 19, 1944, a day that would go down in history as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. It was here that everything aligned for the Allies. Veteran American pilots, flying superior aircraft in overwhelming numbers, guided by radar, and executing a perfected doctrine, met a Japanese force composed largely of inexperienced aviators flying planes that were now outmatched. The result was a massacre. It was the day the sky decisively flipped. The Japanese naval air arm, once the most feared in the world, was shattered in a single afternoon, and it would never recover. When we look back at those first terrifying months of the war, under the same sun, over the same sea, it's a stark reminder of how quickly the balance of power can shift. We must honor the incredible skill and bravery of the individual Japanese aviators who flew the Zero. They were masters of their craft. But their story is a powerful lesson. Wars are ultimately won not just by the brilliance of the warrior or his machine, but by a nation's ability to learn, to adapt, and to produce. The sky belongs to those who can control the factory floor as much as the dogfight. If you found this story of how tactics, technology, and human grit redrew the skies of World War II compelling, make sure to subscribe. We have many more untold stories from the greatest conflict in history coming your way. Thanks for watching.